See all of you this morning. About once every 8-9 months, the gremlins come in the building and start unplugging things and doing whatever they do. And so we're having a little tech issues. I think we've got at least resolved enough to work this morning, at least most of it. But I apologize. There may be some live stream issues that come up along the way. But anyway, we'll work through that. Somebody said to me, and anytime that kind of tech stuff happens, they say, "Well, what'd you do before tech?" And I am old enough. I've used chalkboard. I've used marker board. I use the old transparencies on the old overhead projector and that kind of seat. And somebody said, "Did you ever use a sheet?" And I said, "No, I'm not that old. Never use a sheet." But listen, if you want to go that way, come on back tonight. I'll have a sheet. We'll turn the heat off. I'll take the padding off the pews. We'll put oil lamps on the walls. And we'll build an outhouse out back. All right. So if we want to get right. It's interesting what certain things we think of as unnecessary advances, and other things we're like, no, we need those advances, right? So it's always interesting when you think about all that history of how we assembled and got together and function in terms of our expediencies to get through our worship. Thank you this morning for being here and bearing with us a little bit if we do have some tech issues once in a while. As they come up. I want to talk to you a little bit today. It's funny, I didn't necessarily think of this as part of our themology. We talked to you last Sunday morning about the first Sunday of each month this year. I want to just talk things about Jesus, right? I want to use that as the basic theme and do that on the first Sundays. But this kind of fits in that caption. It wasn't necessarily meant that way, but it kind of fits in that conversation, because at the end of that reading that Mike just had for us a moment ago, there's this description, right, of Jesus that he just read to us. And this is what John's seeing as he sees Jesus there in that heavenly form, and he's described in various ways in relationship to that. And the conclusion of it all there in verse 16, it's simply this: He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. What is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords worthy of? If we believe him to be such, right? If we believe Jesus to be accurately described in the book of Revelation as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and all the various other descriptions that we might read of him, is he not worthy of the very, very best that we could offer him? There are a lot of things in my life that I have done where I have at the end of it just simply said, good enough. Right? We maybe had something that wasn't functioning quite right. We throw a couple of pieces of duct tape, a piece of chewing gum on it, and we say, good enough. We should never have that mindset with our service towards God and towards the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We should never have the mindset of, well, let's just do enough. Let's just do enough to suffice him. Let's do enough to suffice our conscience. Let's do enough that it will look and appear like we're honoring him. No. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is worthy of far more than our good enough kind of mindset. He is worthy of great things. And that's what I want us to challenge each other to think about this morning in our study together. I want you to begin with me here, as we've already noted, Revelation 19, verse 16. And sometimes we don't give the same effort that we should, that Jesus is worthy of. And now I want you to bounce into 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And I want you to notice how Paul describes what was in front of him in verse 8 of 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Paul says, I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost. Why? For a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. There's a great and effective door opened unto him. Paul recognized that there was work out in front of him that needed to get done. He knew that there would be adversaries. He knew there'd be obstacles, challenges. It wasn't going to be easy for him to accomplish that. In fact, on different occasions, Paul just kind of iterates the various things that he kind of had to deal with. And perils in the sea, and perils on land, and perils among his countrymen, and perils among foreigners. Paul enumerates on multiple occasions the kinds of difficulties that he faced, but it never caused him to lose sight of the possibilities and the opportunities that were set out before him. I think sometimes we don't step up to worthy is the Lamb. Sometimes we don't step up to the abilities and the challenges that are set before us that we could accomplish that are worthy of the King of Kings, because all we see are the obstacles. All we see are the adversaries. We are really good. We are really good at pointing out all the reasons why I can't do something. And quite frankly, folks, the reason why we're good at pointing out the reasons why we can't is it only takes 2 or 3 of those to convince us to do nothing. Right? It doesn't take a whole lot of I can'ts to finally just convince us I really can't accomplish that. There's no purpose that I can fulfill in that. And we let that kind of thought process stop any kind of effort or work. We've got to have vision beyond that. Jesus is worthy for us to look beyond the obstacles. Jesus is worthy of us looking beyond the challenges and the difficulties and the adversaries that might come by, the naysayers that might stand by and challenge every thought and action that we might try to fulfill in purposes to God and to His Son. Paul saw ahead of him an opportunity, a circumstance that was great. And he wasn't about to let the adversaries or the enemies of Jesus stand in his way. We need that kind of vision. If I were to ask you right now what your view of the world in which we live right now, how does it appear to you? And you know what's interesting about that? Is that I would imagine that most people would say our world is pretty dark right now. And what's even more fascinating about that is both sides of the political and societal and various issues that come along feel the same way. The only thing we all agree on is that we're all miserable. Right? Everybody is mad at somebody. Our world is dark. Why are you bringing that up, preacher? My point, friends, isn't to acknowledge the circumstance of our world, but all I'm trying to get us to understand that the answer to darkness is light. Eventually, we'll talk about Jesus being light in our series, but I just want you to realize that in a dark, bleak, sad, miserable, hardship-facing world, Jesus is the light, and quite frankly, friends, He's the only light that I know that can fix much of what I see. And we've got to have vision to see that effective and great opportunity to interject the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords into this dark and bleak and sad, miserable world. Quite frankly, He's the only real answer. I've got to have the kind of vision that sees through all the darkness, all the that won't matter kind of mindsets, all the things that distract us and challenge us from sharing the only real light that could change it. And I've got to have enough desire to do that. And so what do I need to have that kind of vision? What do I need to place in my own mindset? What do we need maybe collectively? What do I need to do to have the kind of great vision that allows for me to overcome those adversaries, see through the dark world that I live in, and let Jesus shine through me into that dark and challenged place? And number one, let me suggest to you that it takes great faith in order to do that. In Matthew chapter 14 and verse 31, this is that end of that scene, right? Peter's going to walk on water. If it's really you, Lord, bid me to come out to the water with you. always wondered what went through Peter's mind when he's got his proving ground. Lord, if that's really you, then let me come out on the water and walk. And Jesus' one-word answer, come. And I've always said that Peter must have taken the greatest gulp of air in human history when he was just granted what he asked for. Now what? Right? Now what? Peter's left with one of two options, isn't he? He can step out of that boat in faith and trust that that is the Lord, and if he's walking on water, I can walk on water with him. Or he can see the waves, he can see the challenges, he can see the fear, he can see all the reasons why not to get out of that boat, and he can stay right where he's at. But instead, he, with great faith, gets out of the boat. Does he have problems? Yes. Does he have difficulties? Yes. Does he see the wind and the boisterous raging water? Sure. Does he begin to sink? Yes. But notice verse 31. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand as Peter cries out in verse 30, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus stretches out his hand and caught him and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? What's it take to walk on water with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? It takes great faith. Not little faith, right? I don't want to trivialize, but I'm trying to find a way to get you to think about this. It doesn't take great faith to get up on a Sunday morning and make your way to this padded, pewed, heated, well-lit, comfortable place. And to participate in I'm not saying it's not important. What I'm saying is we limit faith to that kind of thing, as if that was an act of great faith. It's an important act of faith, but it doesn't. I'm asking us, do we have vision beyond that? Do we have vision for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, for work, purposes, and things for me personally, things for us congregationally, that are far beyond arriving at a building on time to have an hour of worship and then go back from where we came? I simply challenge us to think about that as minimal. That's kind of minimal obligation. Can I even suggest to you, if we're not careful, it can become good enough. Good enough. Lord, I was there. Lord, I was there. Now, I'm always cautious anytime you use an example like that. Some of you are not feeling well today and you're here. Some of you are hurting and you're here. Some of you, it's not comfortable for you physically to be here and you're here. I'm not trivializing that at all. But I'm just challenging us to think beyond that. Those are some of the most simplest obligations and responsibilities and great opportunities that we have. Let's think beyond that. Let's think about how can I get out of the boat of that comfortable, I'm there when the building's open, to greater acts of faith. And even, dare I say, risk failure in order to do it. Peter was willing to risk failure to get out of the boat and do something challenging and difficult and hard. And he was able to do that, even with that little bit of faith, was able to do that ultimately because he knew the one place he could go for salvation if it all went wrong. It takes great faith, even when we might fail along the path, to have the kind of vision that it takes to do great things for our King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And sometimes we've got to realize that there's help along the way as well. I readily admit, you've heard me say it before, I am very much a just do it kind of guy. I've been that way most of my life. If it needs done, don't bother other people. Just do it, right? Just do it. But what happens is when we approach service to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, imagine how limited that makes things. When we don't challenge each other to be as presently and actively as involved as we can be. David spoke to the men there in verse 26 of 1 Samuel chapter 17, who stood by him, saying, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David says, we have the help of the Creator. What are we doing letting this giant stand in front of us as if he can defy God himself? Jump down in that narrative as I've sparked your memory of the things that surround David in that story. And notice verse 47, "Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." What we often forget, and the reason why we limit how much effort and purpose that we have and vision that we have for us as servants of God personally and collectively, is often we forget who we're working for. David said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that keeps all of us at bay? The Lord is far greater than him. Let's deal with him." In verse 47, he says, whose work really is this? The Lord isn't saving us with swords and spears. The Lord is saving us because he is great. We have the greatest helper in our King of Kings and our Lord of Lords. We have the greatest source of strength. We have the greatest source of giant killers. We have the greatest source of ability to overcome the challenges and difficulties. We just don't see it sometimes. And see the strength and encouragement that God himself is providing for us along the way. In chapter 6 of 2 Kings, verse 15, "When the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, there was an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, 'Alas, my master, what shall we do?'" We're surrounded. So he answered, "Do not fear." You know, one of the greatest obstacles to doing the great things for our service towards God is fear. We're afraid. We're afraid to challenge ourselves to personal growth because maybe there might be accountability that comes along the way or responsibility. We're afraid to challenge us congregationally to think outside of the boat and do things that are expedient and authoritative, but may not be the way we've done things before. Right? We let fear shackle us when great things could be accomplished. And so he says, don't be afraid. Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed and said, "Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see." Then the Lord opened his eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Why were there more with them than the others? Because God was present. And sometimes God sends help in various ways and purposes. Sometimes God sends help in others that are around us. Sometimes God's help comes in the form of those who are willing to lend a hand and be part of that. And Jesus, being worthy of this great effort and this great purposes that we should establish for him, should incorporate all the hands that are willing to help. And let him strengthen each and every one of us in that way. Sometimes in order to have this vision, then we also need to be willing to open our eyes to the resources and the purposes that those resources could serve that are around us. Jump into John chapter 6. In John chapter 6 and beginning in verse 1. I may just camp here for a minute. But after these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" You wonder at what point the disciples learned pretty quick. Be careful how you respond to Jesus' questions. Because he generally isn't asking questions for his needs. He's asking questions to help you appreciate something. It's not that Jesus doesn't know the answer. It's not that Jesus doesn't even understand what he's about to do. He wants Philip to think about this. What are we going to do about all these folks that are hungry around us? Where are we going to buy enough bread for them? So this he said to test him, verse 6. For he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? And here's what's interesting. In the hands of that young man, 5 loaves and 2 fish are not a lot. In the hands of Andrew, in the hands of Philip, in the hands of any of the other disciples that are present there in that moment, 5 loaves and 2 fish are not enough. But they forgot whose purposes they would serve. It's easy to do nothing because we feel what we have to offer is too little. We can't feed them at all because all we have are 5 loaves and 2 fish. No, that's not all they had. They had 5 loaves, 2 fish, and Jesus. Right? They had 5 loaves, 2 fish, and Jesus. But all they could see were their limited resources. My point, friends, is simple. Don't ever feel like we can't accomplish certain purposes in work because I don't have enough people, or I don't have enough resources, or I don't have enough availability. Right? Don't limit what we do in service to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We've got to be willing to look beyond those limited resources and see their value when they're put in the hands of the service to the King. Your talents are not useless. One of the greatest things that I've seen in my experiences over the years among various churches has been when somebody takes what appears to them to be a very simple talent, but all of a sudden they realize that very simple talent or resource can do far greater things than they ever imagined when it's added to the other purposes and work that other people were fulfilling. Let me just give you food for thought, just to make application. So we challenged some folks, and by the way, thank you. Some stepped in when we asked for some help in our Bible classes, and I want to publicly appreciate those who stepped in and took on new roles in relationship to that. It's great growth. But maybe you say to yourself, well, that's not me. That's not me. I'm not the person to go say, okay, are you the person that could organize class materials? Or are you the person that if a Bible class teacher would hand you 40 sheets that needed cut, right, and prepped for, are you that person? My point is, you might think, well, sure, Brian, I can handle a pair of scissors. Okay, great. Now the next step, and that's part maybe of the role of an eldership, is to figure out how do I get those 2 people to work together, right? But all I'm trying to illustrate to you is your abilities, your talents, your resources, the things you can provide are not useless. when they're put to the purposes of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Don't underestimate what that value is. Do you think that little boy, when he went out, I assume with his parents, to hear this great teacher that's been preaching out here in this place, do you think he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed all the people or to feed himself, right? He took his own lunch. Never would he have ever imagined that that simple thought of taking those resources with him could be put to use to feed thousands. Don't underestimate the usefulness of our resources, personal talent resources, whatever it is, and how they can be used for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And we said earlier in our study, we've got to get past the fears. What's hindering us? What's slowing us down? What's causing us trepidation or causing us to want to step away from the things that we could accomplish? Verse 33 of John chapter 16, Jesus said, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." Do you like to study the book of Revelation? That's challenging, isn't it? You want you ready? Here's the book of Revelation. You want it in 2 words? Jesus wins. There you go. There's a book of Revelation in 2 words. Jesus wins. Right? Isn't that what they're worried about? Their faith has been shaken because various entities and enemies of God's people are creating challenges and difficulties for them. And the whole book is to show the magnitude of who Jesus is. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Jesus wins. And if you don't learn anything else out of the book of Revelation, if you stumble and fall over dragons and numbers, and that's okay. So long as you walk away with an understanding of what the message is about. Jesus wins. And you know why we don't accomplish great things for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Because we're not convinced that's true. At times, we're not convinced that's true. We see a dark world and we think Satan wins. We see evil go unaddressed and we think Satan wins. And we've never once thought about trying to add the light of Jesus into that equation. To let Jesus win for all those who live in that kind of darkness. At the end of the day, we can live in fear and do nothing for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. At the end of the day, we can live in all the concerns and all the cares, and we can limit our resources, and we can worry about the failures, and we can do all the things that hinder the kind of vision and purpose that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords deserves from us. But friends, at the end of the day, with or without me, Jesus wins. I just assume stay on the winning side. Wouldn't you? I think I'd rather just stick with the winning side of that equation. And it's going to be challenging, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not always going to be simple. But it's easy. It should be easier, I should say. When we appreciate the fact that no matter what it is, no matter how it unfolds, no matter what challenge it may be, Jesus always wins. And you know how we know that's true? Because Satan thought he had him when he hung him on a cross through the evil of the Jews and the Romans. And he sees him buried in a tomb. And Jesus conquers him. He bruises his head as he was promised that he would do when he walks out of that tomb. And he declared to any and everyone who ever doubted him, ever questioned him, or ever wondered about him, I win. Even over death. Jesus wins. And we should be honoring him, and we should be offering service unto him that is worthy of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who always, always, ultimately comes out in victory. Will you trust your life, your faith, your commitment to him? Will you rely upon that Savior to bring you the same hope and promises that he's been bringing to men since the day he arrived upon this earth? Will you strengthen your relationship with him if need be? How can we help you? Step into the promises and then get active in being the kind of servant that a King of Kings and Lord of Lords deserves from all of us. And if we can help you do that, won't you come as we stand and as we sing?